There is a stillness that comes before a storm, not just in the skies, but in the soul of a village. In the heart of the forested lands of Asakis, the villagers walked barefoot on sacred soil. Their ears trained to the whispers of the wind and the rustle of leaves. Here, the living and the dead were never far apart. Ancestral shrines stood at every homestead. Their earthen altars smeared with palm oil, kola nuts, and ashes. The people believed, no, they knew, that their well-being flowed from a fragile harmony with the spirits of their ancestors. It had been this way for generations. Every name spoken during prayer mattered. Every drumbeat during ritual carried weight. And to forget even one name among the dead was to offend a soul that never truly left. For years, the village of Asakis had prospered. The rivers flowed clean. The yams grew fat. No one died without cause. But that was before the day of the wrong libation, before one name was replaced by another. The mistake was small, almost invisible. During the annual Nkaidwo festival, where the living welcomed the spirits of the ancestors back among them for one night, the village priest, Elder Kwaku Ansa, poured libation to call upon the protective ancestors. But he left out one name. Worse, he included another that should never have been named again. What followed would change the village forever. Children began to dream of fire and crying spirits. A strange wind howled each night at the same hour. Chickens died mysteriously. The river turned murky. And still, no one understood what they had done, until it was almost too late. This is the story of a forgotten name, a wrong invocation, and a spirit's wrath. It is a story not just of fear, but of remembrance, redemption, and the sacred power of names. The sun had barely risen over the dense canopy of the Asakis forest, yet the village was already pulsing with life. Children chased one another between mud huts, their laughter ringing through the morning mist. Smoke curled lazily from cooking fires, mixing with the scent of roasted plantains, crushed herbs, and burning incense. Today was not an ordinary day, it was Nkaidwo, the festival of returning spirits, the most sacred event in the village's spiritual calendar. This was the day when the veil between the world of the living and the realm of the ancestors was said to be at its thinnest. Every man, woman, and child in Asakis believed that the spirits of their forebears would walk among them, listening, watching, judging. It was a time to give thanks, to honor those who came before, and to seek their continued protection for the seasons ahead. The village elders, wrapped in flowing white cloth dyed with sacred ash, stood at the edge of the communal shrine, preparing for the first ritual of the day. Elder Kwaku Ansa, the Okamfo, the spiritual intermediary, held a carved calabash filled with palm wine. His face was lined with wisdom and age, and his eyes burned with the knowledge of dozens of festivals past. He was the voice of the village when speaking to the dead. The shrine itself was a simple but powerful structure. An earthen mound adorned with cowrie shells, feathers, and stones. Beneath it were buried the bones of the first ancestors, founders of Asakis, who had walked the land before the forest claimed it. Each family had added to the shrine over the centuries, embedding relics and offerings, making it a place of dense spiritual presence. As the drums began to beat, a slow, deep rhythm like a heartbeat, the villagers gathered in a wide circle around the shrine. Women held baskets of offerings, cooked yams, palm oil, kola nuts, dried fish. Children clung to their mothers' wraps, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. The old men of the village stood in silence, their hands clasped behind their backs, listening for signs. Elder Kwaku Ansa stepped forward. He dipped his fingers into the calabash and let the palm wine drip onto the ground in front of the shrine. His voice, though raspy, rang with conviction as he began to call the names of the honored dead. Ako Yaboa, Akua Abina, Nana Kusi, Kwame Osei. Each name was spoken slowly, carefully, almost as if carved into the air itself. With every name, the villagers responded in unison, Yedawa Ase. We thank you. The list of names was long, passed down over generations. Names of warriors. Healers, midwives, farmers, souls who had protected the village from famine, sickness, and war. The elder's voice trembled slightly as he approached the end. A few of the older villagers exchanged glances. Something about the way he was speaking today felt off. Then it happened. A name not heard in years was spoken. Ibo Kwaku. A murmur rippled through the crowd. An uneasy rustling of feet. The name hadn't been heard since the Great Fire of 23 years ago. Ibo Kwaku had once been the village's spiritual leader, but his downfall had been catastrophic. He had led a group of youths in secret rituals, condemned by the elders. Accused of sacrilege. Banished in shame, and later found dead in the forest, his body broken, his eyes wide open and filled with a terror that no one could explain. His name had been erased from the ancestral rolls. Yet here it was, spoken once more into the sacred air. Elder Kwaku Ansa did not seem to notice the unease. Or perhaps he did, and chose to ignore it. His lips pressed tightly together as he poured the last of the libation and whispered the closing words, "Guide us, protect us, forgive us." When the ritual ended, the drums shifted. Dancers moved forward, wearing carved wooden masks representing different ancestral spirits, the hunter, the midwife, the rain-caller. Their movements were sharp, graceful. Their feet pounding the earth in perfect rhythm with the beat. The energy surged. Children clapped. Women ululated. Spirits, it was said, were now among them. But beneath the celebration, something fragile had already cracked. An old woman named Mama Afia stood still while others danced. Her eyes narrowed toward the shrine. She had been a girl when Ibo Kwaku was exiled. She remembered the curses he shouted as he was dragged from the village. She remembered how the wind howled that night, and the dogs barked at nothing until dawn. She remembered what the elders swore. That his name should never be spoken again. Yet today, it had been called, not in error, she feared, but from failing memory. Elder Kwaku Ansa was aging. His mind, though filled with knowledge, had begun to fade in recent months. The wrong scroll. The wrong name. One slip, and now, one who had been forgotten was remembered. And the one who should have been remembered, Kojo Badu. The village's first blacksmith, the man who had died shielding children during a tribal raid, had not been named at all. His descendants would later discover his name missing from the ritual list. But for now, the festival continued. As the sun dipped behind the trees, fires were lit across the village. Offerings were placed beneath sacred trees. Drummers played into the night. Their hands blistered but relentless. Somewhere in the distance, a tree branch snapped, louder than it should have. The dogs barked again. No one saw the shadow standing behind the shrine long after the festival had ended. A figure cloaked in dark mist. Watching. Waiting. The dead had returned, but not all of them had come in peace. The festival had ended, but its echoes lingered. In the silence that followed the drums, the village of Asakis settled into uneasy sleep. Children tossed in their hammocks. Elders mumbled prayers before drifting off. The scent of burnt offerings still hung in the air, thick with palm oil and ash. But something had shifted, something subtle and invisible. Like the moment when a warm breeze turns cool just before a storm breaks. That night, dreams came to many. Not the usual jumbled dreams of daily worries or distant memories, but visions, vivid, piercing, and strange. People woke gasping for air, sweat dripping from their bodies as though they had run miles in their sleep. The dreams were not all the same. But they shared a common weight, an invisible dread pressing down on the chest, a voice speaking from behind a veil, a fire that consumed without burning. Tano. A teenage boy known for his laughter and curiosity, sat bolt upright in his mat-covered room just before dawn. He had dreamt of standing at the riverside, watching the water turn black as ink. From the middle of the river rose a figure with no face, just a void where eyes, nose, and mouth should be. The figure raised a hand and pointed toward the village. Then Tano heard screaming, not from others, but from himself. He had woken to find his bedsheets soaked and his legs trembling. Elsewhere. Young widow Abina saw her late husband in her dream, except his eyes were hollow and his voice twisted. "You are not protected," he told her. "He is angry." She did not know who he was. But she remembered how cold she felt, even while sleeping under a thick cloth. Elder Nana Kabina, the village herbalist, had a vision of the sacred tree behind the shrine bursting into flame. Only to regrow instantly, blackened and weeping sap like blood. He awoke coughing, as though choking on smoke. When he stepped outside to drink from his gourd, he saw the tree, still standing. Silent and unchanged, but he could not shake the image from his mind. The dreams grew worse over the following nights. Children began crying in their sleep, waking with nosebleeds or bruises they could not explain. One girl refused to sleep at all, saying that a man with no feet stood at her window every night, whispering her name backwards. Mothers prayed and anointed their homes with herbs, chalk, and goat's blood. Dogs refused to go near the shrine, instead howling under the huts, refusing food. A rooster died without cause. Its body found in the exact center of the village square, eyes pecked out. Elder Kwaku Ansa grew pale and silent. He had not spoken much since the night of the festival. When questioned, he simply said, "They are restless." But he did not explain. He spent hours at the shrine, pouring libation again and again, his hands trembling. More than once, he was seen muttering to the stones. Then, 5 days after the festival, the river began to stink. It started with a foul odor, rot and sulfur, that drifted through the village on the wind. When the villagers went to investigate, they found dead fish floating belly up along the banks. Women fetching water recoiled from its surface, which had grown cloudy and thick, with dark strands swirling beneath it. The elders ordered a ritual cleansing, but nothing changed. The next day, the river overflowed during clear weather, flooding 2 homes on the edge of the village. Old Mama Afia went to the elders. "We have forgotten someone," she said firmly. "We have made a mistake." They listened, nodding gravely. But when she told them about the name that had been spoken, Ibo Kwaku, the council fell into silence. "That name is cursed," said Nana Kwasi, the oldest elder. "You speak of things buried." "He was buried in the forest without a name stone," Mama Afia replied. "And now, his spirit wanders without rest." And Kojo Badu, the blacksmith, his name was not called. His descendants have not slept in a week. Their dreams are full of flames. The elders glanced at one another. It was true. The family of Kojo Badu had been struck hardest, 2 children had fallen ill, their crops had withered overnight, and the youngest son claimed a shadow followed him in daylight. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. In their attempts to maintain tradition, something sacred had been broken. A name spoken that should not have been. A name forgotten that should have been honored. The balance between the living and the dead had been upset, and now the ancestors were reminding them that they were still watching. That evening, the elders gathered in secret at the edge of the forest, away from the ears of the villagers. A fire was lit, and a sacred drum placed beside it. Elder Kwaku Ansa stood before them, face lined with fatigue. "I made a mistake," he said at last. "I do not know how. But I called the wrong name." They waited. "I saw his face in my dream," he whispered. "Ibo Kwaku. He stood behind me when I poured the libation. He told me, 'You forgot me once. Not again.' And the old man's voice broke, I could not stop myself. It was like my tongue was no longer mine." A heavy silence fell. Then Nana Kwasi nodded. Then we must act before the rest of the village suffers. But no one was quite sure what should be done. No ritual had ever been written for unnaming the dead. No libation existed to erase a spirit that had already heard its name called. And how could they restore honor to an ancestor who had been unjustly forgotten? Mama Afia stepped forward from the shadows. "We must remember both," she said. "Even the ones we fear. Even the ones we banished. Names have power. To name is to give life. To forget is to kill again. Perhaps we must give both names the chance to speak." The elders looked at one another. And somewhere in the forest beyond the firelight, something stirred. The heat came suddenly. The mornings in Asakis had always been cool, kissed by the mist that rolled down from the mountains, carried on the breath of the river. But after the night the elders gathered in secret, the air thickened. The ground cracked. Leaves curled in on themselves. The one sweet morning wind turned dry and bitter, blowing dust into homes and stirring the ash from hearths long cold. By the fourth day, the village gardens began to yellow. Cassava plants shriveled. The yam vines, once strong and twisting, drooped like they had forgotten how to grow. Even the sacred fig tree behind the shrine, known to bloom all year, stood bare. Its branches brittle and gray. They called it the withering. No rains came. No birds sang. The river, once swollen with life, thinned into a sluggish stream that no longer whispered secrets to the earth. Fishermen returned with empty nets. Hunters found nothing but footprints that led nowhere. Goats refused to eat. And chickens laid no eggs. Whispers spread faster than fire. They say the ancestors are angry. They say we called a cursed one, and forgot a protector. Maybe the gods are turning their faces from us. Even those who had once dismissed dreams and omens now began to mutter prayers into their sleeves. Fires were kept burning all day, as if the flames might frighten away unseen spirits. Women tied red cloth around their doorways. Children were forbidden to play near the shrine. Fear had seeped into everything, into food, into water, into sleep. And yet, Elder Kwaku Ansa did not speak. He withdrew from the village, spending long hours beside the ancestral shrine, murmuring in a language that no one else understood. He no longer ate among the elders. He no longer responded when spoken to. Only once did anyone see him weep, when a young boy approached with a question. And the elder could not remember the child's name. Mama Afia, who had once been the village midwife, took it upon herself to act. She began visiting homes in silence, blessing doorways with kola nut and salt water, whispering forgotten prayers to spirits older than the village itself. When she visited the shrine, she did not bow as others did. She stood tall, defiant, and asked aloud, "Kojo Badu, where are you? Why did we forget your name?" On the seventh day of the drought, tragedy struck. A fire broke out in the home of the Badu family. It began without warning, without cause, no cooking fire, no lantern overturned. Just flame, hungry and swift. By the time the villagers arrived with buckets of river water, the roof had collapsed in a blaze of red and black. No one was hurt, but everything inside had turned to ash. All the heirlooms, the tools, the matriarch's stool, gone. As the family wept, the youngest son, Kofi, stood staring into the embers. His eyes wide, unblinking. "I saw him," he whispered. "In the flames." He was angry. His mouth moved, but I couldn't hear the words. The elders arrived, shaken. Even those who had been skeptical were now silent. Kojo Badu's name had not been spoken during the festival. His descendants had suffered the most. And the one whose name had been mistakenly called, Ibo Kwaku, was now being seen in flames and dreams. Something had to be done. That night, the elders met not in secret, but in the open square. Every villager was invited. The fire was lit once again, and around it, the drums were not beaten in joy or celebration, but in mourning. Elder Nana Kwasi stood to speak. "Our world is broken," he said. "Not by malice, but by mistake. A name was called that should have remained silent. Another was forgotten who deserved honor. The river has spoken. The fire has spoken. Now we must answer." The villagers murmured in agreement. Eyes turned to Elder Kwaku Ansa, who sat hunched near the fire, his body still but his fingers twitching. When asked to speak, he simply muttered. "The path is blocked. He will not go." "Then we must find a way to open it," Mama Afia said. "We must correct the names. We must listen to the ones we tried to silence." A bold suggestion came from one of the younger men: hold a ceremony to invite both spirits, the forgotten protector and the banished outcast. Call them together. Let them speak. Let them choose what they need. The suggestion terrified some. "You would call back Ibo Kwaku?" a woman gasped. "He was cursed. He was exiled. And yet he came when his name was spoken." Mama Afia said calmly. "Do you not see? He was waiting." The debate lasted into the night. But by dawn, a decision had been reached. A reckoning ceremony would be held. An ancient rite not used in 3 generations, one that called all known spirits to the circle, not to honor, but to ask them to judge. The ritual would take place at the edge of the forest, where Ibo Kwaku had died. There, the ancestors would be summoned. There, the village would seek forgiveness. The preparations began immediately. The land where the ceremony would take place was cleared, and the ground purified with white chalk and bitter herbs. No food was cooked that day. No drums were beaten. The village fell into a sacred silence as everyone waited. But as they worked, the river dried to a trickle. And on the 11th day, a new sign appeared. A child named Amma, only 5 years old, was found sitting in the ashes of the shrine tree, drawing symbols with her fingers in the dirt. Symbols no one had taught her. Symbols only Elder Kwaku Ansa recognized, markings from the ancient tongue of the Nkamfo, the dream seers of old. "She is being guided," he whispered, eyes wide. "He is near." The withering was nearly complete. But so was the reckoning. The village would soon face the spirits it had angered, and the judgment that followed. The air that evening was heavy, not with heat, but with silence. Even the insects, so constant in the forest that they were as familiar as breath, had gone quiet. The village of Asakis stood on the edge of something ancient. Something deep and unknowable. Children were kept inside. Fires were lit but left unattended. Doors were shut early. No one laughed. No one sang. Every heart beat in the rhythm of waiting. At the forest's edge, where the tall trees stood like sentinels watching over the land, the sacred clearing had been prepared. A great circle was drawn in ash and white chalk, ringed by stones taken from the oldest parts of the riverbed. In the center stood a single stool carved from Irako wood, placed exactly at the spot where, 23 years ago, Ibo Kwaku's body had been found, limbs twisted, eyes staring skyward, mouth frozen in a scream no one ever heard. Tonight, the village would speak to the spirits. Not in praise, not in worship, but in truth. The reckoning ceremony, known in the old tongue as Kasamuka, was a ritual rarely spoken of aloud. It was not a celebration. It was a plea for balance. A trial between the living and the dead. It summoned all who had been named, all who had been forgotten, and gave them space to speak through chosen vessels, if they accepted the call. Elder Kwaku Ansa, draped in robes dyed deep indigo and white, stood beside Mama Afia, who had taken the lead in guiding the ritual preparations. The other elders formed a half-circle behind them. A large pot of palm wine, mixed with charcoal ash and crushed kola nut, bubbled beside the stool. It would serve as the offering, the binding, and the gateway. The rest of the village stood just beyond the circle, their eyes wide and alert, yet none dared speak. Elder Kwaku stepped forward. The names of the dead were mishandled, he said aloud. The old ways were broken by forgetfulness and fear. We call upon those we wronged, those we forgot, and those we misjudged. Let them come. Let them speak. Let us hear their judgment. He poured the first libation, letting the thick wine seep into the earth. I call upon Kojo Badu, the blacksmith, protector of flame and family. We forgot your name when we should have raised it high. Forgive us. Come. Speak. The wind stirred slightly, and a few of the villagers glanced at one another. Then Kwaku poured a second libation. His hand trembling. I call upon Ibo Kwaku, once priest of this village, cast out in shame, buried in silence. Your name was spoken, and now your spirit walks. Come. Speak. Claim what you seek. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, from within the forest, came the sound of footsteps, soft, deliberate, and slow. Everyone turned. Out of the shadows stepped a young girl. It was Amma, the child who had drawn ancient symbols in the ashes of the shrine tree. Her eyes were closed, but she moved as though led by an unseen hand. She stepped into the circle, barefoot, unafraid, and sat upon the Irako stool. The air changed. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the clearing, spinning dust and ash into a small vortex that danced around the girl's feet. The flames of the torches flickered violently. A low, humming sound began to rise, not from the drums, which lay untouched, but from within the earth itself. Then the girl opened her mouth and spoke, not in her voice, but in the deep, echoing tone of a man long dead. You forgot me. The words slammed into the hearts of all present. A few gasped. Others fell to their knees. You erased my name. You buried me in silence. But names do not die. Names wait. Names remember. The voice paused. The child's body trembled, but she did not fall. You feared what you did not understand. You condemned me for what was not mine alone. I asked the ancestors to take me home. They did not answer. Because you denied me. It was Ibo Kwaku. Mama Afia stepped into the circle, her voice steady. Then what do you want now? To be named, came the reply. To be known. To be remembered, not with shame, but with truth. Elder Kwaku Ansa wept. I was the one who cast you out. I believed the stories. I forgot your heart. I feared you. And that fear cursed your tongue, said the spirit. But you have spoken. Now I will leave. But I will not leave alone. The wind surged again, and the girl collapsed. Villagers rushed forward, but Mama Afia raised her hand. Wait, she whispered. Then a new sound emerged, like the clinking of metal. It echoed faintly through the clearing. Another child, a boy named Kwaku Jr., stepped forward slowly, eyes wide. As if pulled by invisible threads. He entered the circle and knelt beside the stool. When he raised his head, his face had changed. I am Kojo Badu, he said. The second spirit had come. I was forgotten. But I do not bring anger. I bring light. The boy reached into the earth beside him, and with both hands, lifted a stone, smooth, dark, and glowing faintly red. It was a forged stone, the kind Kojo Badu had once used. No one had buried it. No one knew it had been there. You may remember me now, the spirit said. But remember all of us. The good, the flawed. The lost. Only when all names are spoken can peace return. The wind stopped. The girl and the boy fell back, unconscious but unharmed. The ashes in the circle blew away. The drums, untouched. Cracked once, just once, then went silent. The reckoning was over. Elder Kwaku stepped into the center, bent low, and kissed the earth. "The names will be restored," he whispered. And above them, the stars began to blink back into view. The morning after the reckoning ceremony dawned with a strange, golden stillness. It was not the oppressive silence of the withering days, nor the suffocating heat that had settled over Asakis like a curse. It was something softer, almost sacred. The air felt different, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from the land. The first to notice were the birds. At first, just one, the piercing cry of a hornbill from the upper branches of the sacred fig tree. Then another, and another. Until the entire village awoke to a symphony of chirps, trills, and song. The people emerged from their homes slowly, cautiously, as though afraid the peace might dissolve if they moved too quickly. They found the earth damp. Not soaked, but damp, soft underfoot, darkened with the memory of water. Yet no one had heard rain. The sky was still cloudless, the sun barely risen above the canopy. And yet, the dust that had plagued them for days was gone. The leaves on the trees had unfurled. The vines that hung near the shrine stood straighter, their tips gleaming with moisture. At the shrine, the fig tree, thought to be dying, had bloomed overnight. Pale yellow flowers clung to its branches, and beneath it, green shoots had broken through the cracked soil. Mama Afia stood there before anyone else, her old hands gently touching the new life, her eyes shining with reverence. "They have accepted," she whispered. The children who had hosted the spirits during the ceremony, Amma and Kwaku Jr., had both awakened peacefully that morning. Neither remembered the moment of possession. But each said they had dreamed of a river, vast and shining, where names floated on the surface like lily pads. Kojo Badu smiled at them from the bank. And further beyond, half shrouded in mist, stood a man whose face was hard to see, but who raised a hand in peace. By midday, a low rumble echoed across the sky. It was not thunder, at least not the angry crack of storms that tear across the plains, but a deep, rolling sound, like drums played in the belly of the heavens. The villagers looked up as clouds began to gather in the west. Thick, swollen clouds, dark and full of promise. Then the first drop fell. It landed on the nose of a young boy, who laughed out loud. Then another struck the roof of the elder's hut. Then another. Within minutes, the skies opened. Rain. It came down in sheets, cascading from the heavens as if poured by the ancestors themselves. Children ran into the streets, arms wide, laughing and shouting with glee. Elders wept silently under doorways. Women let the rain soak their headscarves and dresses, their prayers rising in waves of gratitude. Even the goats seemed to dance. Elder Kwaku Ansa stood near the shrine, letting the rain pour over his aged frame. His robes clung to him. But he didn't care. He lifted his face skyward, eyes closed, and for the first time in many moons, he smiled. The river began to swell that evening. The fish returned first, tiny flashes of silver darting through the shallows. Then frogs. Then the lilies. The sacred relationship between land, water, and spirit had been restored. The river had forgiven them. The next few days were a flurry of life. The crops that had begun to die responded instantly to the water, as though they too had been waiting for release. Yams pushed through the dirt. Plantain trees straightened. Birds returned to nests. Even the dogs, once restless and howling, now lay contentedly in the shade, tails wagging. But more important than the revival of the land was the revival of memory. A new shrine was built at the edge of the forest, not to replace the old, but to stand beside it. A place to honor both Kojo Badu and Ibo Kwaku. The names of both were carved into twin stones and placed side by side. One represented protection and forgotten loyalty. The other, misjudgment and misunderstood pain. Together, they reminded the village that no soul was ever entirely good or entirely bad. And that forgetting any name, be it out of fear or shame, was to forget a part of themselves. During the dedication of the new shrine, Elder Kwaku Ansa spoke his final words as spiritual leader. "My voice led us to error," he said, "but my silence would have led us to ruin. I will step aside now. Let younger ears hear the whispers of the spirits." He passed his staff of office to Mama Afia, who, though old herself, was chosen for her unwavering courage. The village cheered. The ancestors, it seemed, had chosen well. At sunset that day, the drums played not in mourning or fear, but in celebration. The festival of Nkaidwa would come again the next year, but it would never be the same. It had evolved, deeper, truer. Now every family kept a book of names, passed down with care. Each child learned the names of their forebears, not just the honorable ones, but even the flawed, the complicated, the forgotten. Because in Asakese, they had learned this lesson: every name has meaning. Every life, a thread in the tapestry. To forget one was to risk unraveling the whole. And so they remembered. Through rain, through ritual, through song, they remembered. Years passed. Seasons came and went across the village of Asakese like the tides of a calm but powerful sea. The rains returned with rhythm, no longer feared, but cherished. Children who had once huddled in fear during the withering days now danced beneath the clouds without hesitation. The land had healed. The people had healed. But most importantly, memory had healed. The twin shrines stood side by side, weathered by time, yet tended daily. One bore the name of Kojo Badu. Carved boldly into the stone, blacksmith, protector, father of fire. The other bore the name of Ibo Kwaku, once cursed, now restored, a reminder of wounds made not by evil, but by misunderstanding. The two names, once divided by silence and shame, now stood as guardians of a deeper truth, that all spirits deserve to be known, and that to speak a name was to give it breath again. The book of names had grown thicker in every household. No longer did families keep only the stories of the proud and praised. They wrote down the forgotten, the troubled, the exiled. Each name was a line in a living song. The village elders, now led by Nana Afia the Brave, would gather the children twice each year to recite the ancestral names, not from memory alone, but from reverence. It was no longer about perfect recall. It was about intent, respect, presence. One day, a boy named Kwabena, a descendant of Ibo Kwaku, stood before his class in the learning hut. He was quiet by nature, prone to observing rather than speaking. But on that day, he asked a question. Can a spirit forgive if we don't know their name? The room fell silent. Nana Afia, now grayer but no less steady, walked slowly to his side. She knelt, so her eyes were level with his. There are names we may never learn, she said gently. Some are lost to fire. Some buried in pain. But when we search, when we care, when we listen with our hearts instead of our ears, that is remembrance, too. She placed her palm on his shoulder. And sometimes, she added, a spirit will whisper its name again, if the wind is right, if the soul is ready. That night, Kwabena sat near the twin shrines, the moon casting a silver glow over the stones. He closed his eyes and whispered, I am sorry, great-grandfather. I know little about you. But I remember you now. Even if only your name. He thought the wind stirred, just slightly. The fig tree behind the original shrine swayed once, though the air was still. And that was enough. In the deepest part of the forest, beyond the reach of daily footsteps, stood a tree with no leaves. Blackened from old lightning, twisted by time, yet still standing. Birds did not nest there. But once in a great while, someone passing through, perhaps a hunter, perhaps a wanderer, would hear a faint sound nearby. Not a voice. Not quite. But something like the murmur of a name. Soft, persistent. Waiting to be remembered.